Hey, I'm Pastor Mike. So I know this channel has been inactive for a while, and I'm not sure at this point if we're gonna uh, do anything else on it or not. But about 2, 3 days ago, I received a notification on my phone that somebody left a comment on the YouTube channel. And when I actually went to look for the comment, I couldn't find it anywhere. And this is not the first time this happened to me. Basically, like certain comments come in and YouTube allocates them somewhere and I can never find them. They're not on the videos, they're not in the queue, they're not in the spam folder. Um, Anywhere I look for any new comment or anything, it just doesn't show up. Or if I look at all the comments on the channel, it's not there. Anyway, maybe somebody can explain to me what I can do to find it if it's still available. But I did see like in the notification the first 2, 3 lines of the comment, and I'm very familiar with the argument, so I thought I would address it anyway. So basically, the comment is a counter argument that I've gotten a lot whenever I tell people that LGT in its purest form is a type of co-redemption, and it's necessarily labeled a heresy. In other words, if co-redemption is not a heresy, probably nothing is. This whole idea that Jesus plus somebody else is responsible for redeeming humanity or redeeming the universe. That thing is about as heretical as you could get. But at its purest form, LGT is a form of co-redemption. And somebody came in and left a comment saying something like, "No, it's not co-redemption. It's basically uh, just God completing the atonement process." And that's all it really is, the LGT formula. And again, I've addressed this already in previous videos, but I'll do it again because essentially people don't seem to be getting it. But no, it cannot be that. There's only two options: either it is co-redemption, or the solution that Andres and tried to put together doesn't work. And I'll explain what I mean in a minute. And one of the reasons why people don't get why it has to be this way is because they don't get what Andresen was trying to do. Because he was actually trying to solve a problem. And the problem is a legitimate problem, a problem that Adventists haven't really addressed uh, publicly, or haven't really put together an actual response to, but have mostly ignored. And the problem is the very nature of the doctrine of 1844. So, when we tell the world that the investigative judgment began in 1844, this final judgment, which is kind of like a final inventory of everything that has happened in the past several thousand years of human history, what we're essentially telling people that is that the end should be really soon after that. So the entire first generation of Adventists, because of this very idea, were convinced that they were at the very brink of the end. They probably were not going to see death before Jesus came. They were convinced of that, but they were convinced of that based on the theology, not based on some random assumption like some of the people I've grown up with, who just believed that Jesus was coming soon, and then they grew old and died, and then another generation believed the same thing, but they grew old and died. No, the first generation of Adventists were theologically convinced, like the very logic of 1844 convinced them that they were the last generation, essentially, that they were not going to be able to see death before Jesus came. Now, by the time Andreasen comes around, all the pioneers are mostly gone. Ellen White passes away. And he's dealing with a crisis because essentially he feels that either our whole theological construct is wrong, the whole 1844, the sanctuary is wrong, or there has to be some answer. Why hasn't Jesus come yet? And there has to be an answer that doesn't put on God the blame for this delay, because then you'll be like, okay, God, you promised to come and then you decided not to come again after you've already told people you were coming 2,000 years ago, and then and you didn't come, and now again you're putting us through this whole disappointment over and over. So essentially, what I'm getting at here is that Andresen is solving, or is attempting to solve, something specific, and that is to try to find a way to preserve the integrity of the Adventist doctrinal system, so that we don't have to say, oh, our whole thing about 1844, the sanctuary, the whole thing is bad. He was trying to preserve or to protect that theology, but at the same time, he was trying to find a way not to put on God the blame for history continuing further than we expected. Because the minute you say, well, we thought Jesus was going to come and he didn't, we're essentially kind of saying that, you know, God kind of tricked us again. Like, you know, here's this theology, the 1844 theology that is correct. And yet he's kind of like told us he was coming and he still didn't come and all this stuff. So Andresen is trying to deal with something specific here. And by the way, I'm not questioning 1844, the sanctuary, any of that stuff. I believe there are solutions to that dilemma that are better than what Andresen had to offer. But what I'm trying to say here is that his solution doesn't work. And his solution was specifically this, that um, there has to be this last generation of people that pretty much face Satan in the same way that Jesus faced Satan when he was on earth, and then defeat him in the same way that Jesus defeated him. And until they're ready to do that, there's this delay. Now, a lot of times when I talk to LGTers and I try to explain to them that this is not a workable solution. Yes, Andresen faced a real problem, a problem that a lot of times we don't even think about, but the problem is legitimate. And he came up with an answer to that problem, but the answer is bad. And it's bad because logically it just cannot work no matter how he twists it. So he's looking at the situation, and so let me say, go back to what I was saying. Like a lot of times when I talk to LGTers, they get bogged down by having too many variables in the picture. Like, for example, they say like, no, it's not co-redemption. It's just that God made a promise and God has to keep his promises. They have all these different things that distract them from confronting the fact that there are real problems with the solution Andresen was proposing. So the way to eliminate all these extra variables, all these extra distractions, is to go back to the very beginning of time. And by beginning of time, I mean before God had created anything, before even Lucifer had been created, before anything had happened. So God is looking forward and saying, okay, I'm going to create intelligent beings, beings that have free will, beings that have the choice to rebel against me. And I need to have a contingency plan if they do rebel. And as God is thinking about this and planning the creation and planning the, everything that has happened since, when he looks at what needs to happen to secure the universe against sin popping up a second time, assuming it does come up first. So basically, if sin arises, God has to come up with a solution to the problem of sin, and the solution has to be of such a nature that sin never rises up again. And as God is looking through the corridor of time, if we think back to the very beginning, is his solution that Jesus comes and lives a life as a human being, gives his life for sin and all this? Or is his solution that Jesus does this, Jesus comes as a human being, and by moment surrender, gives himself over to the Holy Spirit and defeats Satan and resists sin on earth. And then another generation at the very end of time, the 144,000, also have to do the same thing, where by moment surrender, they give themselves over to the Spirit to live, could fully take over their lives, and then to be able to resist Satan to the point where they don't give in to sin at all. Is the solution Jesus doing this, or is the solution that both Jesus and the 144,000 have to do this to defeat Satan? Okay, so right now we've already got rid of all the other elements, all the other things in the picture that an LGTR might be tempted to argue, and we're thinking way back at the very beginning. What is God's answer to sin? Is God's answer to sin something Jesus does, or is God's answer to sin something Jesus does plus something that 144,000 do at the end? And together, this combined victory is what results in protecting the universe from sin ever coming up again. If it's the latter, that is co-redemption by definition. So there is no debate here. This is not up for discussion. That is the very definition of co-redemption. If, when God initially looked forward in time and tried to figure out what needs to be done, if his answer was, we need Jesus to come down and defeat Satan, and then we need another group of people at the end to defeat Satan in the same way, then that's co-redemption. Okay, so that option is bad, and it's heretical. If it's not, if God doesn't need both Jesus and the 144,000 to win the great controversy, then Andreasen solution doesn't work, right? It doesn't solve a problem. It doesn't solve the problem that he was trying to solve, because you can no longer say the delay cannot be blamed on God, because if God doesn't need this final generation to solve sin, he could have found some other solution at the very end of time to bring about the second coming. And essentially, he hasn't really proposed anything useful to resolve the dilemma that he was trying to solve. So you have a solution, you have a problem, and Andresa has proposed a solution, and the solution doesn't work. It doesn't work either way. It doesn't work if in fact both parties are needed, both Jesus and the 144,000, if they're needed. If they're both needed, that's co-redemption, and it's heretical by definition. If it's not needed, then he's not really solving the problem that he set out to solve. So either way, what Andresen has proposed, or what he has contributed to the Adventist thought process, is just a non-answer. It doesn't work. It's logically flawed. It's heretical. No matter how he twists it, it just doesn't come together. And this is significant. We wouldn't care about this, because there's tons of Adventists that have come up with bad ideas over the centuries, or the century and a half, or whatever it's been. But the reason what Andresen did matters is because he actually started, during the whole fiasco with QOD, with questions on doctrine, with the Froome and everything else, he started a movement within a movement that has split the church ever since then. So it's been since the 50s and 60s, and now we're in the 2020 something. So that's at least 60 years. It has split the church ever since, because of a bad answer to a problem. Like, the guy made a mistake, and that mistake has affected generations of Adventists since. So we have, thousands of Adventists all over the world that grow up in a certain culture, whether it's the Weimar culture, the Heartland culture, all these independent groups, even kind of supposedly centrist, more centrist elements like 3ABN and Amazing Facts and all these groups that are in fact crossing the line into LGT territory, and and actual even official church segments like, for example, Michigan Conference. Entire groups of people are their entire existence is built within a culture, a movement, a certain way of thinking that stems back to a beginning point that's bad. And this is not saying that the other side is good. In other words, Froome made some massive mistakes, and we can talk about that a lot. we can spend hours talking about all the stuff Froome did, and how much better he could have gone about what he was trying to do. But instead, he made his mistakes. And of course, hindsight is 2020. And I don't know if any of us would have done better in his shoes. But he made plenty of mistakes, and the people that were with him and the people that came after him made their fair share of mistakes. But it doesn't change the fact that what Andres did was bad, and it created a split in the church, and the split hasn't gone away, and it's not going away. In other words, no one is really even attempting to solve it. There's this like, all these theological differences have become cultural differences in the church, and have become political differences. So now you can't even change it, because there's people like up and down the administrative ladder that are trying to move up and kind of rise up the ladder. And in order to do so, they need the support of people that are on either this side or that side, and they need to go along with people and give them opportunities and all these different things, because otherwise they're not going to get their support, and they need that support. So I mean, it's become a massive problem for the denomination, and it all traces back to this one dude named Andresen, who could very easily have followed the council, and instead of thinking like, oh wow, I got a solution, I'm just going to take it to the world, he could have gone and taken it before the church, and had in the multitude of counsel there is wisdom. He could have had a bunch of people thinking about it, studying the issue, and eventually they would have figured out, hey, this is bad. This solution doesn't actually solve anything. But no, he had all this influence as a seminary teacher and administrator and theologian in the church, and he decided that he's just gonna take his solution to the world as if this is it. This is legitimate Adventism. And unfortunately, because of that, now, decades later, we're in the mess that we are as a denomination. And I don't see anybody really doing anything to solve it. And let me speak to the other side right now as well, because like one of the reasons why I spend so much time talking about LGT is because the people that are fighting against LGT have made major mistakes as well, because they never took the time to really understand the inner logic of the LGT system. And because of that, they got fixated on stuff that doesn't matter, like, the nature of Christ, the nature of sin. And, they might say, well, no, those things do matter. But no, you yourself don't think they matter, because if you did, you would have dealt with it. In the sense that, like, okay, if somebody believes that Christ had the pre-fall nature or post-fall nature, whatever, and you think that's an actual heresy, something bad, you'd have treated it as such, and LGT would have never got a foothold in the church. But no, the people that are against LGT's view of sin or view of human nature have treated it more like kind of like a benign heresy. So they've essentially said, like, look, sure, we don't agree that Jesus took Adam's nature after the fall, but that's not like one of those things that are like as bad as, say, being anti-Trinitarian or shepherd's rods or something else. It's not such a major thing. So essentially, let's just, it's not a good reason to really discipline people over in the church. So it's pretty much made it possible for LGT to grow and to thrive in the Adventist context, because people fixated on elements of LGT that are not as bad as other elements of LGT, and by fixating on those, essentially it gave LGT a pass in the church. But if people would have focused on the core element, which is this co-redemption factor, this is a real heresy. Like I said earlier, it's essentially impossible to find a heresy that's bigger than this heresy, and yet this is the central point of everything else that in Andreessen's whole thought process, in the thought process of LGT after that. And if our theologian had fixated on that, I would say, no, this thing is bad. This is like a real nasty heresy, to the point where, like, we need to apologize to other people out there that we've been complaining about because their theology is bad, when we have something this terrible in our midst. And then they would have treated LGT the way they had treated other heresies kind of floating around the church. But because they never fixated on the real problem, they sort of gave LGT a pass, and we are where we are today. So again, coming back to the beginning, LGT at its core, this idea that people at the end of time are gonna fully overcome sin, and then they're gonna be put in a situation after the close of probation where they're tested in the same way that Jesus was tested when he was on earth. And in doing so, they are contributing to the process necessary to secure the universe against another fall for the rest of eternity. This idea, there's no saving. There's no saving it. There's no way to get out of the problems caused by this idea, because either it's heretical because it's a form of co-redemption, or it doesn't actually solve the stuff Andreessen was trying to solve, and we're back to square one. And all this 60 years of history, and 60 years of debate, 60 years of split personality in the Adventist church are unjustified. There's no reason for it. And unfortunately, that's where we are. And again, Andreessen is different than other people that we had to face with, like whether it's Kellogg or Ford or others, because these guys, Ford, for example, came in with the idea that Adventism made a mistake, and he just made up his mind and moved forward, and essentially did his best to try to undermine Adventist theology. And at some point, I might do a video on this as well, but pretty much all of Ford's stuff is just nonsense. And I think a lot of the people that have tried to argue against Ford's arguments in the past didn't realize how big a nonsense it was. and essentially gave him legitimacy just by actually trying to reason with the guy and trying to present legitimate counter arguments, when in fact his whole thing is just a mess. And it's anyway, it's easily dealt with without dealing with into all this long and complicated arguments that people have tried to put together. But Ford and others like him set out with the idea that the Adventist approach to things is bad. We need to fix it. We need to get rid of it. Andreessen, on the other hand, didn't. He actually believed in the Adventist system, and he was trying to save it. He was doing his best to try to redeem what he felt would probably be a critical problem with Adventist theology otherwise. In other words, he was sincere and he was trying his best to help the church. Unfortunately, his solution turned out to be really bad. And if he had taken the time to consult with other people, they would have probably helped him understand that it's bad, and we would have never had this mess in the church. But here we are. So, no, there is no way to escape the co-redemption charge. At its core, last generation theology is a form of co-redemption, is heretical, needs to be done away with in the church, because otherwise we would be worse than any other probably heretical movement that has existed in Christianity since the time of Christ. Um, but yeah, so again, there's sorry, but there's no way to escape that charge. Now, lesser forms of LGT, or what I've talked about other. In other words, if you go through some of the previous videos I put on this channel, a lot of people talk about LGT and see themselves as being part of LGT, but they don't actually hold this co-redemption element, which is in fact the whole logic of that system of thought. It's at the center of its logic. Everything else is secondary, and it doesn't really matter at this point in time. We need to just focus on this one element and deal with it because it's bad. But other than that, there's no, if coming back to the original comment person that left this comment here, there's no getting out of the co-redemption charge. And because of that, we are in this situation of the church where half the denomination has their roots on something that is just a big blunder on the part of one individual, and we've allowed the denomination to be in this mess for so many years for no reason. So anyway, I know the individual that left this comment is not going to agree with me, but unfortunately, there's no escaping this situation.